And so our first session, Data-Driven Trends Impacting Content Creation, I'm going to call up our panel now. We have Liz Herzerich, Trisha Melton, Natasha, I'm going to botch this, Haritzik, and it's so easy to say Schwartz, Lori Schwartz, and then Hillary McLaughlin. So come on up, ladies, and we are going to have a great conversation. And just as background, Liz and I have done sessions before at NAB. Liz is coming from running all of research for Warner Brothers, and she'll get into that. But I wanted to mention it because all of these ladies have a long history of working with studios, networks, and content creators. So you're in for a real treat.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, everyone, for joining us so early. We wanted standing room only, Hillary's SRO, but thank you for joining. So we're going to jump right in. As Lori mentioned, I'm Liz Herzerich, and I'm coming off a career at Warner Brothers, many years working with creators in film and games and TV and SVOD, and worked with Hillary for many years, and Natasha and Trisha. So we have another analyst, a data analyst, and consumer insights, trends, culture specialist. Natasha will tell you more about herself. Hillary, a famous creator, and she'll tell you about some of the shows that she's launched and is launching. And Trisha, a marketer extraordinaire who has launched and relaunched networks, as well as product for kids and teens and families. So I'm first going to pass the mic to Natasha, if you can give us your background.
Good morning, everyone. So I am currently VP of General Entertainment Insights at Warner Brothers Discovery, and we've just added another. I'm sure you follow the press. We've had a lot of shifts and changes, so also focused on corporate strategy. I think what's interesting about being in Insights right now, and I've been 8 years in media and entertainment, is that we're suddenly having to contend with the reality of being a direct-to-consumer business, having to really understand consumers on a level that we maybe haven't had to historically, in much the same way a CPG company would. And we're also owning data in-house for the first time, and I think it's really, from a researcher perspective, but I also think in terms of the opportunities for entertainment companies kind of pivot and move in new directions. I think it's actually a complicated time, and I think for some maybe a little unnerving, but it's also very exciting with a ton of opportunities to really rethink what entertainment's going to be over the next 5, let's not go so far as to say 10, because who knows, but let's say 2 to 5 years.
Hillary, give us a little history.
Okay. Yes, I have a long history of being in a research scenario. I started out at a TV rep firm, Celtel, which is now no longer in business, I believe. But I have always loved understanding the viewer, understanding the user, understanding what drives people's interest in content, and I moved up into research. I was a temp at Laura Martella Pictures, with one of the early iterations of the company. That's now Warner Discovery. But I was there for 27 years, and I moved up into development. And I did a lot of talk shows, Ellen DeGeneres, Rosie O'Donnell. We launched TMZ, which was the first cross-media platform series and project that kind of was innovative in its time and has still endured. And I, have found now that I've moved into I worked also at CBS. I did programming there, oversaw that group, Judge Judy and Dr. Phil and Inside Edition and a whole array of shows. And in general, that traditional syndication model has been very challenged now. So I've been trying to figure out sort of how to also get back into that now that I have sort of gone on an entrepreneurial course and have my own production company now called New York 27 Productions, and we do multi-platform programming, focusing on talent and formats and great stories and characters, and really focus on culture and sort of reflecting culture and wanting to be part of shaping the culture. It's a hard time in the business right now with the consolidation, and people are buying less. There's fewer giant budgets that there used to be, and so many buyers. But it feels like still that there's a need, and So I think, data certainly plays into that, as does, sort of persistence and trying to figure out really what's the next thing, what's going to be the next big thing, and trying to kind of pinpoint that. So that's my mission.
That's great. Thank you, Hillary, for sharing.
Yeah.
Tricia?
Good morning. I'm an entertainment girl. I basically have grown up in this business. Most recently, I was the CMO at Warner Brothers Discovery for the kids, young adults, and classics division, which includes brands like Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, Turner Classic Movies, but also the franchises of Looney Tunes, DC, Hanna-Barbera, you name it. So that was what I was doing most recently. But interestingly, I started in news in this crazy business of ours, but not traditional news. I actually started with a news program called Channel 1 News that was created for and distributed in high schools and middle schools across the country. And here's a fun fact for you. This is where Anderson Cooper got his start. He was a fact checker at Channel 1 News. True story. But my point on all of that is that I've been on the marketing side of this business, and I cannot do for my entire career, and I cannot do my job without fantastic insights, without really compelling data, and being able to create those stories from that data. So when Liz and I first met, I think the first thing I said to her was, I'm a super user of research, so we're going to be like this. So
That's great. Thank you. So, Natasha, you kicked this off, and maybe the panel can answer. Many of our businesses were B2B, so we licensed content to other businesses, and we didn't have that first-party data, which we now all have with our SVOD services. So HBO did have some data, but now with Max, you have consumer-facing data. Hillary, in your new venture, your New York 27, like getting data is probably somewhat of a challenge, especially on those diverse platforms. So if we can talk about how has your use of data evolved over time, and now understanding the consumer with the first-party data.
I think what's been sort of peculiar and hasn't totally been resolved in our industry is this separation of data. You have your syndicated data, which is collected, Nielsen is arguably that kind of third-party data source. Then you have the data that you collect yourself on your digital platforms. And then what people kind of call sometimes disparagingly survey research, or what people tell you, so what we call primary research. And I think what is really vital, and I kind of think on some angles on the CPG side, you never really separated out that data. I used to work for General Mills, and they were all different sources of data that would provide a holistic view of the consumer. So you never really thought of them as separate data sources, but different facets of how consumers are engaging with your brand or product. And what was interesting for me when I joined Turner, which is where I landed initially, and especially a few years later when we were getting ready to launch HBO Max, now Max, was that the data group, the primary data group of the first-party data group, still sat completely separately from the primary research group. And I think that made things incredibly challenging from the start, because you're operating with different KPIs, you're operating with different objectives, and it almost became adversarial. Like they would say, well, how can, we believe that your research is valid because it's just what consumers say. And I used to always have this analogy like, well, okay, so imagine you're suffering, you're getting sharp pains down your left arm, and you go to your doctor's office and say, I'm experiencing these really crippling pains down my left arm, and now it's starting to move to this crushing pain in my chest. And the doctor says, well, that's just self-reported. I'm going to throw you on a treadmill and, start sprinting because we need to get some first-party data. Human beings are capable of describing what they like, what they don't like, what their aspirations are, what their needs are. I mean, I think that, what's happened when these two data sources end up at odds, you lose a complete picture. I think the magic of first-party data, and where we really, I'll give you a use case. When we launched HBO Max, we needed to really understand who are the people who are subscribing and who's out there that we should be acquiring, because everything about them would mark them as a HBO Max loyalist. But we didn't even know where to start. Where do we find them? Who are they? What do they like? What are they watching and why? And so the data science team did a viewing segmentation. But what happened was we ended up with a segmentation with movie watchers, drama watchers. It broke down by genre. But that still didn't really tell you, well, is that all they watch and why are they watching? Like, that didn't really help from a marketing perspective. I mean, you could at a high level kind of target the drama people with new drama releases. But if you're trying to drive viewing across a platform, it's just not sufficient. So we built out this. It was complicated. We built out a segmentation using primary research, but what that enabled us to do is to build a segmentation driven by needs. So what are the needs that drive the decision to watch? And we found out that there were, our core were what we called aficionados, people who have a deep, almost professional love, a hobbyist's love for content. They watch, they want to be the first to view. They're the ones that everybody comes to when they're trying to find something to watch. They're basically experts. They know directors, they know writers, they know actors, encyclopedic knowledge of viewing. And then we had the zeitgeist, younger, and they wanted to watch because they didn't want to be left out of the discussion. So immediately you understand the psychology of viewing. Then the tricky bit came, well, how do you connect that to first-party data, which just tells you what people are doing? And it took a year and a lot of experimentation, but what we ended up doing is using our CRM database, ran a short version of the survey that was more based on psychology, psychographics, on the first-party database, which enabled us to actually track and signal, like determine who in our first-party database fell into each one of the segments, so we could immediately market to our existing customers with that overlay of understanding the psychology of why they were watching what they watched. I'm going to leave it at there. I could get into the third-party syndicated piece, but that's for another day because that was a drama in and of itself.
Basically, what I'm hearing is that there's more and more and more data, but there's really a need to curate and to organize and decide what data to use in what business decisions. So, Hillary, maybe you can add. As a creator of content, a lot of your decisions are based on your gut and your experience, and some are based and informed on data. Can you walk us through examples or how you weigh the two?
Yeah, I mean, I always try to find some kind of analytics or research related to what I'm doing or our team is doing. And it's sort of like an enterprise operation. You have to kind of like scour, even there's not a lot of transparency on like streaming. I don't have access to all that information. So we do a lot of due diligence trying to figure out, sort of what's trending, what personalities are kind of top of mind, trying to anticipate emerging trends when we can, kind of getting ahead of it. And and then there's this sort of topical part, which is the trying to reacting to what's happening and trying to do quick turn projects or longer term that that you're going to sort of fill in the story as it progresses. So I would say I would love to have like some kind of research that I can just like actually go through and like be able to like determine, but you can never really know. I mean, it's obviously very difficult to kind of anticipate what's going to be successful or not. You have to go with your gut. You have to go with it's a sort of a visceral feeling that you get, and and also track record in some cases. There's there's people who there's a lot. There tends to be a feeding frenzy when things happen, and there's certain characters come out of the sort of become part of culture, and then everybody goes after them at the same time. So all the production companies chase the same things. There's like 10 production companies chasing after the one person who's like the lifestyle person who's like the hot person on TikTok right now. So over the course of time I've tried to use research as well as I could, but at the same time definitely go with the gut of the team and our experience. But there have been occasions, like for instance, like Ellen DeGeneres, when we launched that show, she was coming off of her sitcom. She was not, it was not like a positive, happy goodbye. She was basically banished from her show. And, in the syndication market, the stations were very wary of her. They were, afraid that she was a gay activist. They were afraid that she had an agenda. They thought her comedy was dirty. They thought she was, somebody who had, like, no relatability to a daytime viewer. So we did research, and we found out that it was focus groups, and we found out that most of the people thought she was for late night. They liked her. The women in the group did know that she was much more of an observational comedian and somebody who was relatable on some level. She was talking about very kind of relatable things. She didn't have a big agenda. And so we had to actually get the stations to come to, we did comedy shows in major markets. We went to Boston, and we invited them to a show so they could actually see her, because they did not believe that she could actually connect with people or relate to a woman in daytime. So through that process, we were able to eventually convince them. We had Sharon Osbourne at the same time. We had a show with her that we were doing, and NBC wanted it. And Sharon had just come off she was on the Osbournes, and she was very hot, and everybody loved her, and she was, she's this wild character, but she had never done a talk show. She had never really done anything that would give anybody the impression that she could do that, other than she was a very straight, big, she had a big personality, point of view, but she didn't really have the skill set. I always say, what are they going to do at the top of the show? Because there was nothing at the top. What's at the top of the show doesn't work. You can't do a show. So we did a bait and switch. We got we got NBC interested in Ellen, and then we switched Sharon to Tribune station. So we launched both at the same time, and Ellen lasted for 19 years, and Sharon lasted for basically a season. So it's some of it's just it's taking advantage of what people think is hot and happening, and a publicity magnet. But then you find out that you really have to have a skill set to actually do that and do this, and so that would be sort of an example of not following the data and not following the focus groups, but knowing that we had something there, and it was a risk for sure, because we didn't know, and it took a while for people to kind of catch on to it. So that's.
I remember those days. I remember the comedy shows and Finding Nemo, and using all of that positive momentum to really get her launched. And you guys did a phenomenal job. So, Tricia, can you share with us some of your recent experience, how you leverage data in some of your campaigns? And I know you had some exciting relaunches, and maybe you can share with the group.
Yes, sure. So, marketing is a blend of art and science. So there's definitely a need for data and analysis. And then, not unlike content creation, you have to take the years of experience and your intuition and your gut and apply that. But one of the first things that I had to do when I started at what was then Warner Media, which is now WBD, was to do a brand audit over all my brands, right? So remember, Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, Turner Classic Movies. So focusing on Cartoon Network, one of the first things that we did was viewership analysis. We had a recent brand segmentation that had just been done, and we looked at global brand awareness and attributes for not just Cartoon Network, but for the Warner Brothers Kids and Family IP as well. And that gave us a very clear picture of what we needed to do and what we had permission to do by the viewer, by the consumer. And that was broad. We really needed to broaden the aperture of Cartoon Network. We needed to bring in preschool. You cannot be in the kids business without being in preschool. You just can't. We needed to bring in girls. Cartoon Network was doing a fantastic job with boys 6 to 11, but girls were sort of not invited to the table. And the last time I checked, I think girls make up more than half the population. And we needed to get into family. So that's exactly what we did. We very quickly put together a rollout of a preschool brand called Cartoonito, which was Cartoon Network's preschool sibling. We rolled that out globally quickly. And our focus on content was to leverage that tremendous Warner Brothers IP. So we did something that had never been done before. We created preschool content from DC, Batman. It's called Bat Wheels. So one of the things that the research that we did taught us was that parents and dads in particularly were really excited about the idea of being able to share their love for DC, and in particular Batman, with their preschooler, with their 4-year-old, but in an age-appropriate way. So, maybe not the Joker, but Bat Wheels was great. We also created, a Scooby-Doo preschool show, Scooby-Doo Mystery Pups. We created a Tom and Jerry preschool show. You get the idea. But we really leveraged that IP. And we were able to make those kinds of decisions and to reposition the brand to be broader frankly, because we had tremendous amount of data and analysis, and we continue to do more. So that's a little example of what we did with cartoon.
Great, thank you guys. So one thing that we're seeing is this evolving format, right, and viewing patterns across platforms, bringing up TikTok and YouTube videos, and I'm kind of piggybacking, Tricia, on what kids and young people are watching and what a challenge it is for a linear network to compete today. How are you guys looking at new platforms in terms of messaging, in terms of creative, Hillary? And Natasha, for you to understand, like, what are the needs? We often say, what are the needs or the need states? Why do people watch, where they watch, when they watch, how they watch, right? What is driving them to that platform? So maybe we can start with you. And is there any work, is there any insight into some of the newer platforms?
Again, I think we're kind of at this interesting point of inflection where we know we're going to have to shift the business. And one of the things that, because my team covers the entire enterprise, one of the things we realized was that the business was heavily focused on, as they should be, preserving the current business model, but maybe not looking ahead enough. And we thought, the first thing, and we sort of flagged up, well, Gen Z's viewing differently. And the word that we were getting back across the board was, well, once they get older, they'll just start watching TV. And, as an and it is a gut thing. And in your gut, you're like, I'm not sure about that. So
will they?
Will they really?
Don't think so.
Generations are different because you grow up in a different context with different devices, with different experiences. That has a mark on how you progress as an adult. So we realized, geez, before we start saying we need short form, we need to actually dial it back and establish the problem statement. And we've just wrapped up a piece of research called Entertainment Now, which actually is something Liz started 15 years ago. So we've got a lot of great longitudinal data. But, to fast forward to what we found, Gen Z and Alpha, so Alpha is basically 210 to born today at NYU, and then Z is 2010 to about 23 years old, right? So 13 to 23, give or take. And what we've found is that they are spending 50% of their time at a minimum watching social video. And you'd sort of say, okay, well, that's the purview of the teens. But when you look at their longitudinal viewing, it hasn't shifted from 13 into their 20s. And actually, you see with younger millennials, it's about the same. They're more YouTube. And with the Zs, it's more TikTok. And Snapchat is also a really huge a huge platform for them. And so once you sort of establish that, look, this is how they've grown up, and this is really the way they view short form is a critical format. It's not even about the platforms. It's that they're not watching a lot of episodic TV and movies as their sole type of content. They're watching, 50% of their time is watching short form within that context. So then what that enables us to do is say, we got to unpack short form, because I think, in our industry, everybody remembers the thing that didn't work. So everyone's like, well, Quibi. And it's like, okay, well, you can't just say that was an issue with short form. There were, layers and layers of issues that led to the failure of that platform. Let's learn from it. But if 50% of the generation that's going to be the predominant buying generation, the one with the money, in the next few years, we need to grapple with this and stop thinking about short form as this thing that lives on social media, but as a different type of content that we need to grapple with. And it suddenly struck me, and I'll leave it with this funny little thought I had. We were hosting something on the lot a couple of days ago, and it suddenly struck me in the morning when I was having my coffee. Wait, but short form's not a new thing. Like, you think about the advent of this industry was film, and then suddenly in the 1950s, TV showed up, and TV was actually perversely was kind of short form at the time, because everybody had been going to cinemas watching 2-hour feature-length films. Suddenly this box shows up in people's households, new context, new viewing environment, and they're watching 20 to 30-minute segments of TV. Well, we evolved as an industry. We figured it out. Movies still exist. TV still exists. So I think this is just that other aperture where there's a new type of even shorter short form, and we just need to understand how to leverage it in our business.
I think that's so true, and I think it's something we all have to keep in mind, that the needs and telling stories and connecting over stories and culture, that need has remained the same. The way we access it, where we access it, is changing, but the needs haven't changed. Those are basic human needs, and when you keep those in mind. So, Hillary, you mentioned you're telling new stories. I don't know if you can share anything with some of it, but are you playing with formats? Are you playing with links and new platforms, thinking of social platforms for distribution in addition to traditional?
Yes. We have been looking at, in terms of just sort of these sort of democratizing of content in general. It's a good thing because it's created all new creators and new people to discover, and it actually it's young to old. It's not necessarily just like young now. It seems like that's at least 50% of the time. 50% of the audience is on that for hours a day. I mean, some people just set a limit so that they can't do more than like it's crazy how much time people spend on it. So it is very compelling. But I think what's interesting about it is that you can actually, you're able to actually use that platform like a Instagram Live or a TikTok Live, or you can stream in real time. You could do a show bypassing gatekeepers and going right into the world, and and getting sponsors involved and create businesses out of that. So we've definitely been looking at that, just because the challenges of getting buyers to buy and the time frame in which it takes to actually get things going. It could take a year or 2 years in development, and then agendas change, executives change, things change constantly. So we've been looking at that, really trying to come up with talent that is related, has social media following, that can actually just sort of get on the scene and kind of capturing them in their own environments, so that you can kind of really get an intimate connection. So I think it's a great thing for the business, just that you can actually create your own programming and just put it on, and then AVOD on top of it. Usually sometimes we'll run some of these programs as well, so you can kind of have multiple platforms. So it's definitely something that we're looking at with talent, and even sort of nesting concepts or trying concepts to see what happens.
It's exciting. Is new opportunities for storytellers, for new voices to be heard. I assume it also brings up a lot of challenges for someone like you, Trish, in terms of how do you reach these viewers? I mean, everything is so fragmented now. Even looking at the streaming numbers in aggregate, streaming is starting to sort of wane as social viewing grows, right? And so how do you access, and as it splinters into I just read a stat last week, there's 30,000 different channels or platforms in the United States alone to view content, including all of the social, right? So how do you aggregate a message to break through?
Well, it's a lot harder than it used to be. It's the first thing that I would say. And look, it's sort of a good news, bad news scenario. The fact that you have, that we've shifted from everything being Nielsen and third party to having access to first party data and having access to social listening, in some ways is a tremendous benefit. We can get real time, sentiment from viewers, from fans about how they feel about a show, a character, a plot line, a movie, the set, the wardrobe. You can get that kind of level of information, and you have to be able, the trick is, you have to be able to immediately activate and act on that in terms of what your overall strategy is. So the way that we start approaching a campaign, which is very different than it was 20 years ago, is, I like to start, once we've established what the strategy is, with looking at, all right, what are the right platforms for executing that strategy? And it doesn't start with traditional media in, any shape, fashion, or form anymore. It's going to start with, and particularly when I'm talking about young adults, Gen Z, millennials too, although they're getting older, and Gen A. Forget it. You have to be, your message and your content and your whole strategy has to start on YouTube, on TikTok, potentially IG. Depends what the show, what you're actually getting ready to launch or market. But you have to be there, and you have to be there with content that's not just a cut down of something that you're doing as part of the show. You have to make content that is literally for the platform, for the audience, that's going to speak to them in a way that is resonant and that they're going to, have an immediate emotional connection with. So.
Yeah, it seems like in addition to platforms, in addition to data, it's now how do we make those strategic decisions? What platform, what piece of content? Natasha, maybe you can share with us where there are gaps or elements that could enhance. I'm sure we have entrepreneurs both on the floor and in the audience today. Like, where are those data gaps? What are you looking for that's not there today?
I mean, I still think the big issue, and I guess I'm kind of circling back to my first point, is that the data's not integrated, so it's really hard to pull it all together to get a complete view. And that's across our industry. I mean, it's what the ad sales folks are suffering from because Nielsen's not speaking to whatever third-party digital measurement companies they're using. I think for content creators, you might be pulling viewing data from the streaming platform if you can actually access it. If you're a production company, you're not even going to see that data. You can certainly, everybody can do primary research. I mean, it's just a matter of finding people and asking them questions. But the problem is it's really hard to find a way of pulling all that together, particularly from a research perspective. When I'm working with, state content creators and marketers, you can't just say, well, the primary data says 42% of people like this, and viewers are, the viewer demographics are this, and the Nielsen viewing data is X. Like, that's not helpful to anybody. You need all of that integrated so you can tell an end-to-end story. And I think the big issue, and this is even the issue that we hear from consumers about discovering content, there's too much of everything, too much information, too much data, and it's all dispersed right now. And if anybody can come up with a magic formula, actually AI, what am I talking about? There's this thing called AI. I mean, that's really, I think we kind of live in fear of AI, but my God, AI can also step in and do things that I think as humans, we just haven't been able to tackle right now. And it's not like digital data is new. I mean, the digital age has been around for a long time, and we still haven't really figured out how to pull all these data sources together in a coherent way that enables, people to actually drive decision making from it. So I think, these are areas where AI just is inherently, it's the job of a computer. Like, let's break it down. It's the job of a computer to drive aggregation and to probably even do pattern recognition, pull out recommendations that the human then interprets and disseminates into a business decision. So I'm sure there's a few AI people out there, so data integration.
Yeah, I want to hit 2 points that you mentioned because the innovation in our industry has really been around the ad business, right? In terms of new players coming into the space to challenge the established players and offering more targeting, much more nuance and flexibility. But as a content side of the business, there really lacks that intuition or that understanding of where, how, and why people are watching, and no innovation has happened in that space. It's all been around the ad model, and if anything, if the strikes have told us anything or taught us anything, it's really that we need that holistic picture, right, of what viewers are consuming and why. That's the revenue model. Like, I always hear these ad models, and as much or more of the industry is driven by content licensing deals, right? And no one ever aggregates those numbers, and those numbers rival and surpass ad sales. So it's like, again, something for the entrepreneurs in the audience to be thinking about, and why we had the strikes and continue to have the strike with SAG. But also generative AI. You brought that up, and you brought up that some of those in the industry are alarmed or concerned by it. I happen to believe it offers opportunity in terms of data aggregation and understanding. But Hillary, thinking of your creative hat and generative AI, do you see a purpose? Do you see a role? And how are you using it today? And where do you see it in 18 months from now?
Yes, I am a fan so far, and see, even though there's like doomsayers saying that it's going to take basically
humanity is doomed.
We're going to be gone as a society. But yeah, I mean, we have not utilized it exactly yet in the sort of video production side of things. But I know that there's like virtual sets, and there's special effects and it can create imagery and presentations and help writing and all those kind of things that take a lot of time when you're in an organization, and you could save money if you're a small company, and actually utilize that in a way. And it's once it gets to know your voice and like your sort of your sensibility, it kind of like can create things that you feel are actually connected to your own sensibility. So I think that's helpful. We actually have tried to dive right into the AI space with we have a relationship show idea where there's AI avatars competing with humans for a date with somebody. And you cannot, based on the technology, you cannot tell the difference between the AI avatar and the humans. And so it's kind of interesting because I think it'll sort of play into people's biases, and it has another layer to it. They'll know that some of the people aren't actually real, but they will actually they won't be able to see it until they sort of try to figure it out. So we think that's sort of an interesting way to kind of test the boundaries. But I think it's got a lot of application, and it's kind of amazing, actually. I don't know. That's in my opinion, but
That's fun. That seems like there should be opportunities within game shows.
Yes.
Too.
This
for
is sort of a form of
AI
competition.
versus the competition shows AI versus human. That
Yeah.
seems like
Yeah.
a lot of white space there.
yes, I agree.
What about it for you, Tricia? Where do you see it in marketing, in messaging, in targeting, in your creative?
Yeah. All of the above, and obviously clearly on the insight side. And I'm of two minds. I mean, on one hand, I actually think it's tremendously exciting, and I'm using it myself. I'm using it as I work on strategy. I'm using it from a design perspective. It will have tremendous implication once it starts getting built into the workflow of creative teams in terms of post-production, potentially writing, particularly writing that is not the where you don't need the really original brand voice, but where it's just repetitive, type work. It's gonna change everything, and it's gonna make it more efficient. At the same time, and I'm going to go back to the research piece of this for a second, because I do think it's going to have AI is going to have such an impact on research. But we can never let go, for me, of the holistic analysis of all that data. We've just spent time talking about how data is hitting us from all sides, and it's not often tied up in a bow, which AI can help. But you still need that intellectual analysis of why. It's going to tell me a lot of what people are doing and how they're behaving, but you still have to get at the why, which requires real partnership with your insights teams and your data scientists. But I think when you have both of those things, when you can get the holistic understanding paired with the ability of AI, then you have something that's actually authentic intelligence, not just artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I agree with you. I'm using it so much, and one area where we're using it also is with synthetic personas. So it's very expensive to talk to consumers. You have to pay them a stipend, and so we're starting to build personas around consumers, right? So you can have an ongoing discussion with them. But I also am somewhat concerned that biases get written into those personas, right? Because we all have inherent biases, and how do we control for those? So while it's exciting, it's also challenging, but I think there's great opportunity. So I think as we wrap up, I just wanted to do a speed round in terms of what are you enjoying and where do you see it going in the next couple years? And what are some of the innovations you're enjoying in content the most, or in data, whichever strikes your fancy?
First of all, I love authentic intelligence, because I think that's really the missing link, which is the human voice, the human instinct, human psychology, and that gut feeling. I mean, that data is science, but the interpretation does come from experience and instinct, and that's so important. I thrive on change, and I think it's that really critical moment. I mean, digital, again, has been around for a long time, but the acceleration of the change, as we all know, has really been pretty bewildering. And I couldn't be more excited to tackle, I'm really excited, it's the short form piece. I think that it's just another extension of storytelling. I think it's going to be vital for us to continue to thrive as an industry. And I think there's a lot of interesting work to be done to unpack all the nuances around short form. We've been talking a lot about needs. I think the fact that this is a format is interesting, but buried within that format are thousands of different subtypes. What are they, and why do people, what's the division of labor from a consumer perspective? What does a certain type of short form do from a needs perspective? What's the job it does? Is it about teaching? Is it about immersion? Is it about informing? Is it about anticipation? Like, we need to really unpack that to help guide our businesses into the future. So I love the change. I mean, I'd hate to do the same thing every day. And I think all of this represents an interesting opportunity from a research perspective to help our stakeholders understand what's next and how do we grapple with it.
Hill?
I would have to say, sort of this idea still of people creating their own content and sort of figuring out how to sort of capture that. Whether it's podcasting, which I'm a particularly huge fan of, and, I find that a very interesting way to start ideas and then potentially sell them to TV buyers, because it's sort of more proven content at that point. And just also the range of people that are involved in it. It's really interesting. It's topical. It's crime. It's an incredible array of it almost feels like the old days of like radio, but it skews young, and it's like interesting, like how young people like really want to sit for 1 hour and listen to something when they usually have a very short attention span. So I think it's revolutionizing things. I think from a content standpoint, sort of we look. That's a big place to scout for story ideas and talent, and in addition to user generated content. So I'd say that is one of the areas that I'm excited about in terms of, because anybody can do it, and there's a lot of really interesting content and premises there.
Everybody's got a story, right?
They do.
Yeah.
Everybody does.
Trish?
I'm going to go a little bit old school for a second. One of the things that has excited me in the past couple of years is the diversity of storytelling. Different types of stories from different types of people. I think we've had a really interesting explosion of that in the last couple of years. And one of the things, I'll use the example of the Barbie phenom that we had this summer. I think it was a fantastic show of when you get it right, when you're telling a unique story, using a really great piece of IP, by the way, but doing it in a way that you're telling a different, new story. And one of the things that I do think is funny about this, though, and that I do love, is that, so there's a ton of data on how well Barbie performed globally. But one of the things that keeps being written about is the takeaway that the world wants more movies about toys. I'm not so sure that's the right takeaway. I think that the world wants more movies from women for women. And that's, I think, an exciting opportunity. Let's keep telling those diverse stories.
I think that sums it up nicely, right? It's how you interpret the data. And, not to put too fine a point on it, but right, was it about toys or was it about the larger story, cultural story? Well, I think that wraps up our time. I'm looking at Lori and Megan. If there's any questions, we'll take them, but we want to thank everyone. I want to thank the panelists. I think we're living through an incredibly exciting moment in time for storytellers, for researchers, for consumers. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.